Good afternoon, everyone. I'd ask that you go ahead and take your seats, hopefully toward the middle, so we can start on time. We have 3 great sessions today, and we want to give everybody the full time for their talks. Sadly, Jim Johnson cannot be with us today. He was called away, and so luckily, one of his colleagues, Alan Parnell, and you'll see his bio in your handout, graciously agreed to pitch it for Jim. I think he's done so in the past. And so, without further ado, please join in welcoming Dr. Parnell.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to Chapel Hill, everyone. Demographers usually like an early morning caffeinated crowd because we've been described as CPAs without a personality because we have this inordinate affection of numbers. But I'll try not to focus too much on the individual numbers and focus on the major trends that we're going to be talking about, these large demographic trends that are affecting our country and our state, North Carolina, some of the challenges and opportunities, and I look forward to hearing from you. I know who will do well on the test, the ones who sit down front, right? That's the way it goes. Every 10 years we have a census, constitutionally mandated, not as many questions as there used to be, but we start learning a lot of information. And we've identified 6 what we're called disruptive trends. Changes in the regional distribution of population, movement to the south, the browning of America, marrying out is in, the silver tsunami is hitting, the end of men, and what Jim likes to call cooling water from grandma's well and grandpa's too. It's a song he sang in church and I didn't. But anyway, I hope you'll look forward to telling you about it. The South demographically continues to rise. What you see, trying to figure the best place for me to look at the numbers. This is the change from 1910 to 2010 and the U.S. absolute change and the South's absolute population change. And you say until fairly recently, the South was growing moderately, but more recently, the South's rate of growth has been growing significantly. If we look at the regional population growth, we see the Northeast, the Midwest are growing at a much slower rate. The West, and in particular, the South, and North Carolina is even exceeding the growth rate of the South. This is 2000 to 2010. If we look at the shares of the growth, we see the South accounted for more than half of the population growth in the country between 2000 and 2010. The West 32%, and the Midwest and Northeast lagging well behind. And this is all due to migration. It's people moving. It's not we have a lot more babies down here and people don't die. It's where people move. And you see all types of people have moved to the South. There's been a return migration for the last 15 or 20 years of African Americans back to the South, a net migration increase. The growth of the Hispanic population. Retirees are moving back to the South. The foreign-born are moving back to the South. The Midwest is picking up some seniors. The West is picking up African Americans and foreign-born, but the South is the only one where all different types of groups are moving. If we look at the state shares, it's not really the South, it's 4 states. It's Texas, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, who account for almost all of the overwhelming part of this growth. So people move for their jobs. And North Carolina has been one of the leaders in job creation, at least parts of North Carolina, as we'll get to. So we see, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, lovely places, but they're not really growing. The opportunity to the degree that there is in Texas and Florida and Georgia and North Carolina just hasn't been there. These 2000 to 2010, these are the areas, the counties with the most population growth. It's the I-40, I-85 corridor, what Jim likes to call the Kingdom of Mecklenburg, and down in Brunswick and New Hanover. The areas these are the areas, and these are where the jobs have been. This is where the jobs being created. Everybody in growing. Those in red barely grew. Those in yellow and brown lost population between 2000 and 2010. Eastern North Carolina is not a real big surprise. My mother's from Bertie County. It's a beautiful place. I love it, and it's so sad to go there now. The end of family tobacco ended Bertie County for right now. But those numbers, 2000 to 2010, what they don't take into account is the recession that came at the end of the decade. And the recession has changed so much. You see, these are migration numbers kind of in the first half and the second half, 2004 to 2007, not really the whole first half. And you see there's still both domestic and foreigners moving in and out. But even Florida turned around between 2007 and 2010. More people left Florida, of all places, than moved there because of the collapse of the housing market, the collapse of the economy. This has since turned around, but there have been some big changes. The recession had effects we are still trying to figure out in North Carolina. It's changed so much. These are the counties between 2010 and 2014, the counties in red. There were more deaths than births. More people died than were born. That's not a good situation, economically, demographically, clearly. The labels are reversed here, but the blue ones in this, more people moved away than moved there. The blue, the kind of the pinkish color, more people moved in than moved out. The recession, what family farms, small family farms were left, they're gone, but what the recession really did is in Burke County, it ended the furniture business. In Rockingham County, it ended what was left of the textile business, and the same in other places around the state. It pushed them over the edge, and they're not collapsing, but people are leaving because more people are leaving than moving in because there isn't the opportunity. We've created created a typology of counties, and in some ways it's kind of harsh. Some people don't like some of the labels. We have balanced growth where they're both more births than deaths and more people moving in and moving out. That's what you want, right? That's a growing population. We have counties we call natural growth. More people are moving out than moving in, but there's still more births to offset the loss. We have what we call migration magnets, more deaths than births, but people moving in, the net of people moving in offsets it. We have three categories for the counties that are losing population in our state. 49 counties have lost population since 2010. 2 barely grew. So basically half our counties are losing population in this state, while the Raleigh, the Triangle, and Charlotte are 2 of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country. We have this big emerging divide, demographic divide. Many of them are dying. This is the label a lot of people really don't like, but what can we say? There are more deaths than births and more people moving out than moving in. We have the biologically declining, where there's still more people moving in, but this is offset by the number of deaths relative to the number of births. And emptying out, still more births than deaths, but people are leaving. I don't know if you can see this that well. The dark purple are the dying counties. The Virginia border, northeast, and moving into the mountains. Lighter purple, biologically declining, emptying out the darkest of the blue. So this is a fairly recent occurrence, and I think it's directly, part of it's long-term trends. You know, eastern North Carolina, the mountains have been struggling. But the recession has really accelerated the decline in our state, and there's a lot of implications of this I hope to talk about later. So while the North Carolina remains one of the fastest growing states in the fastest growing region, where our growth is incredibly uneven, and this has implication for politics, this has implication for economic development, and people, this gets buried. Demography is rarely front page news. Let me show, okay, I'm gonna get really geeky on you now. This graph shows the percentage of men and women in each of these 5-year age groups. This is the Raleigh metro area, Raleigh and Cary. You can see the baby boom in there, the people who you've got to be sick of listening about, those whippersnappers right behind you. But you can also see a fairly large number in young adults and children. In contrast, this is Lenoir County. I'm not picking on Lenoir County or Kinston. I was down there 2 weeks ago. I had a wonderful meal at the Chef and the Farmer. But this is typical of our counties that are losing. Look what happens after 15 to 19. It just collapses. The young people are gone. And here you can see they're overlapped, the Lenore counties in clear. So they're, is that right? Yeah. So they're much older, a higher proportion older because the young people are gone. And it's just not the numbers, it's the talent, it's the human resources. Kids go to college, they don't come home because there's not opportunity. Kids go in the military, they don't come home because there's not any opportunity. So this is a huge challenge to try to create jobs in places where much of your talent is left. So how do you retain the talent? How do you attract the talent back to these areas? Whereas, you know, the challenge in Raleigh is they're growing so fast as the young adults growing, and the other ones have babies, right? So they can't build schools fast enough. So I'd rather have that problem though. I'd rather have the problem of building schools fast enough if we have to, a straightforward demographic problem. We see since 2010, again, the regions, we've gone back to the old pattern. We've added Virginia in here. No, this is the South, but going in here, and the shares are growing. So the pattern has returned since the recession. So it hasn't changed, and Virginia is creeping in. It's really now since 2010, it's 5 states in the South. But North Carolina, you see, is still growing at an incredibly strong rate. It's over 7%, and this is just 3 years. We're growing, but again, the unevenness. By 2020, Wake and Mecklenburg will have over 21% of the state's population, 2 counties. And the smallest 50 counties will have 13% of the state's population. Again, this huge divergence, and it's not just numbers again. North Carolina is getting like much of the country, a lot browner. I was reminded of this stuck home to me in 2000. My house had burned down. It wasn't a good thing, but I bought a piece of furniture down in Perquimans County. I was driving back through and stopping Canada in Edgecombe County. How many people know Canada? It's not much there. It's a crossroad. You know, I grew up in a black and white world like most of you, and there were about 30, 40 Latino guys out front, which it was a little new, but you're used to seeing in 2000. It was a Sunday morning. There was a black lady dressed to go to church, and a white man dressed to go to church. And then the store where I stopped to get a Coke. And the black lady, 2 kind of short brown-skinned guys behind the counter, and she goes, "Are you brothers?" And one guy goes, "No, I'm an Arab, he's a Jew." Here we have in Canada, North Carolina, Edgecombe counties, blacks, white, Arabs, Latinos. You know, what has happened, and this is part of this larger trend in our country that's continuing. And this, again, is driven by people moving. This is immigration driven. This is a quick history in terms of numbers. Since 1900 in the immigrant population, and we see it continues to rise. These are cartographs that exaggerate the size of the sources of origin for migrants by how many they sent. And we've gone through several regimes. This is just the 20th century, most of the 20th century. In 1921, we passed a law to try to maintain a certain ethnic composition. That was the goal. We weren't focused on Latinos then, we were focused on Italians, Greeks, Slavs, Russians, Poles, trying to keep them out, trying to restrict their numbers. We wanted Western Europeans. We didn't want those other people. But you see where they're coming from. Our migrants weren't from Asia. We had the first big immigration restriction was the Chinese exclusion law in the late 19th century. You see most were coming from Europe, and Western Europe at that. Between 1961 and 1988, we start seeing a shift. In 1965, we had the Hart-Celler Act, which took away the ethnic restrictions. It changed, and we start seeing a big shift. 1987 to 1999, we see that Europe is contributing negligibly or much smaller. Canada has almost disappeared. Asia, Mexico, Central and South America have become much more important sources of immigration, of migrants to this country. These are the numbers. It fluctuates. The legal immigrants on the left, so we see a large number of legal, but all immigrants aren't called immigrants. On the right, we see what are called refugees, parolees, and asylees, classified differently. Refugees who, because of political risk, military action, whatever, are allowed in. asylees seeking political asylum. And we see we have large and fluctuating numbers there as well because of the varying conditions in the world sending people. We know we have a lot of people undocumented or illegally coming in here. As Jim likes to say when he's asked how many, a lot. We don't know. They don't, if you're undocumented, you're not out there saying, hey, count me. It's a trick. We're guessing 11.5, give or take a couple million, something like that. But we see it's grown significantly. And it's a huge political and economic challenge. And it's complicated. It's really complicated. I was down with the Farm Bureau in Nash County. A bunch of big farms. The small tobacco farm's gone. And this farm we went to, 500 acres of sweet potatoes, 500 acres of tobacco, 100 acres of strawberries. All, as the head of the Farm Bureau, Larry Wooten, likes to say, ain't been a machine invented yet that picks strawberries. And the same goes for sweet potatoes. And so they have a huge need for labor, and we're not filling it, They get a lot of what are called H-2A workers, temporary, but the rest of their workers are undocumented. And they'll tell you, they say we'll go broke. We'll go broke if E-Verify goes in. These are our big farmers, so it's complicated. We also have a lot of non-immigrants. Who are non-immigrants who come to the country? Tourists, students at UNC. So we have a large number of non-immigrant visitors. Exchange. I'm going to go back to that. When they don't go home, when their visa's up, they're now illegal. They're visa overstayers, but they're illegal. 40 to 45% of our illegal immigrants in this country came in legally. They didn't come across the river. They walked in with a visa and did not go home. 9/11, none of those people walked across the Rio Grande. They came in as students on student visas. So we have to, building a wall is not going to keep these people out. We have to just deal with that. We have to face up with what's going on. It's more complicated than people coming across the Rio Grande. It's a much more complicated world. It's a lot of numbers, people coming in, and it's a global society. What are we going to do? How do we not let people in, our students? This is the foreign-born population by race ethnicity in 2011. You see the Latinos, Hispanics are the largest, but they're not a majority, 46.5%. White alone, not 18%. Asian, alone, we say alone because demographers can't make anything simple. We started letting you give 2 or more identities in the census, so we have to keep throwing extra qualifiers in just to make sure you're awake. And we see almost 25% of the foreign-born in this country now are Asian. And here's North Carolina's foreign-born population growth. If your economy's growing, people are going to come. They're going to come from all over the world. And that's what's happening in North Carolina. In 2012, 748,000 foreign-born residents in North Carolina. That's a lot of folks. Almost 8% of our population. And we see the trend up. And the trend accelerates when our economy starts booming, when we start taking off. Here's North Carolina's population, the change between 1900 and 2007, the numbers I had. And we see whites grew by 127%, blacks 133%, about the same. Hispanics 829%. Asians 332%. There are not that many Pacific Islanders, but they've grown too. Here's the relative growth by region in North Carolina for the non-white share between 2000 and 2010. And the country as a whole, 91.7% of our net growth between 2000 and 2010 was non-white for the country. North Carolina, 61% of our net growth was non-white. I'm looking around this room. It's going to change. The picture's going to change before long when we come at the 50th reunions in the class of this class. Our whole society is just changing enormously. And we see North Carolina has, these are the 2011 economic development tiers. The tier 1 are the 20 highest performing economic counties, tier 2 are the next 40, tier 3 are the 40 lowest performing counties in the state. And we see the contribution, this is the contribution of non-whites. In tier 1 counties, 84% of the growth, not a whole lot of growth, 69,000 people in 40 counties, was non-white, and over half of the net growth was Hispanic. If the Latinos were not coming in, these counties I showed you, the counties that are declining, would have declined even more. Tier 2, 34, tier 3 counties, a quarter of the net growth was Hispanic, and 59.1%, 60% non-white of the growth in tier 1 counties. Okay, as we become a more racially, ethnically complicated population, our marriage patterns are changing, and that we more and more are marrying someone of a different race or ethnic background. These are the numbers, the trend between 1980 and 2008. And we see up to now 14.6, by 2008, 14.6%. And it keeps going, it's probably around 16% now, are marrying someone, the newly married, are marrying someone of a different racial or ethnic background. 8% of everyone, but the newlyweds, about 15%. Who's marrying? Hispanic and whites account for 41%, one of the largest. Both non-white groups, 16%. Asian white, 15%. Black white, 11%. Again, the growth of the Latino population is reshaping the look of our families as well. Way too many numbers here. I'm going to, stay awake. But our marriage patterns, the last half of the previous decade, Hispanic, it shows the different patterns. The Hispanic men and Hispanic women who marry out, who they're marrying. White men, only 3.3%, 3.4% of white women. But we say Asian and Hispanics, the two groups that are growing most, not surprisingly, are accounting for much of this new intermarriage pattern. With the growth of, again, it's not just numbers. Migrants are young people. There's not a lot of 70-year-old Latinos in North Carolina. Not many at all. Moving's a young person's business, especially when you move from another country. What we have are the median ages. This is from the American Community Survey, our annual survey. This is just women. The median age of white women in North Carolina, 42.9. If you remember, median half above, half below, 42.9. And it's gone up since then. Blacks, 35.8. Look down there at Hispanics, 23.8. 23.8. That's the median. Childbearing ages were the median of the white people. I mean, your people are pretty much through. I mean, pretty through certainly by 43.9. Childbearing, it's over. So the population, the proportion of the population of Latinos, it's a much younger population. We're going to see more and more we are seeing more and more Latino kids in school. They're not having a whole lot more babies, but they're just young. They're proportionally younger. Here's the fertility rates per thousand over on the side. A better measure of fertility, well, I was coming up in a minute, I forget what's coming. This is the distribution in the US of births over time, and we see in 2011 for the first time, less than half the births in our country were to white women. Hispanics is up to 26% of the births were to Hispanic women by 2011. 15% to blacks. But we see the growth of Hispanic and the decline in white, both because of the growth of the Hispanic population, but because the white population is so much older. And again, this shows up in the school-age population. This shows up in the schools. We see in 2000 versus 2009, we've had a 60.4% growth in the Hispanic school-age population in our state. 1.2% increase of white kids, 60.4% of Latino kids. And growth also of the black kids, 32%, Asian kids, 7%. So this younger age of these different groups, being in the childbearing ages, is leading to shifts in the composition of young folks, and composition in our schools. Another big change, I planted 26 tomatoes last Sunday, and I felt it, so I'm getting there. I'm one of those damn boomers that's getting older too, and will be joining you in the growth of this senior population in our country, and the enormous challenges that's presenting in many, many ways. We're just finishing an analysis for Leading Age North Carolina, which is the professional association of continuing care retirement communities. And there are wonderful facilities, great opportunities, many challenges that they're facing. They're trying to look out in the future to see what their market's going to be like in the next 20 years. These are the changes, absolute changes by age group between 2000 and 2010. And this population 65, with the baby boom of those people, 45 to 64. So enormous growth there. The baby bust that followed, not much growth. Then the 65 plus, 27.3%. Because the baby boom has now hit age 65, for the next 20 years, we're going to have over 8,000 people a day turning 65 in this country. Each and every day, 365 days a year, 8,000 plus people with, Medicare and other implications of that. Our organizations like UNC, the faculty, like any organization you worked in professionally, this wave of retirement, how do we replace that intellectual capital, the knowledge, institutional knowledge within all of these organizations? It's opportunity for young people, but we're going to be losing so much as so many move into retirement. And how are we going to organize that so we can keep growing and using the knowledge that you and others have accumulated through your years of experience? One of the big problems, though, in these areas that are declining, I told you they were really old. In many counties, we have more people now not in the labor force than are in the labor force. They're highly dependent. This is totally unsustainable. The dark brown here, there are more than 100 people not in the labor force because they're too old, too young, or disabled, whatever, than are in the labor force. In the growing areas, it's less than 60 or 60 to 80. But you see, this is just the South, but you can see the areas where there's this unsustainable demographic pattern. You cannot maintain a local economy when there are more people not working than are working. It's not feasible. I don't know what we're going to do. This is in some ways the context. I don't know how many of you still live in North Carolina. There have been debates about should we shift some of the sales taxes from the metro areas to the rural areas. This is kind of the demographic context for that argument. These areas do not have the capacity to fund schools. This is, again, back to the tiers, and we see the changes, and we see the tier 3, the poorest performing, they're losing young people. A lot of the seniors are aging in place, either because that's what they prefer, they are invested both emotionally in their communities and perhaps economically, while the tier 1 counties are really growing, the counties that are the Wakes, the Mecklenburgs, the Durhams, the Guilfords. And here's the dependency rates. See, in the tier 1 counties, it's 90 now, many of them it's over 100. Tier 3, the high-performing counties, 56. So for every 100 people working, there are 56 that aren't. In the tier 1, for every 100 people working, there are 90 that aren't. So we have, it's not just numbers. There's substance involved here as well in the composition. Focusing a little more on just on North Carolina, the red, it's over 100. The blue, it's high. So this match up pretty well with the earlier maps of the counties that were losing population, right? The counties that were dying or declining, and the counties that were growing. So the Mecklenburgs, the Triangle, they're home free, I mean, demographically and economically in other ways, because they are thriving. You know, thriving areas have a different demographic structure. Another change with the complicated patterns of family that we have now, family and childbearing. When I was more of an academic demographer, I did a lot of stuff on childbearing, and my wife would just shake her head like, why is anyone interested in this? But it's been really fascinating to watch the changes in the family. It's been very disconcerting for the country as a whole as we see these patterns change. One of the patterns that's quite important is the increase in the number of grandparents who are the primary caregiver for kids. And these numbers show the increase in the number of grandparents. These are households that changed between 2001 and 2010, where children, an increase of 42%, 41.9% of children living in households where both grandparents are present. And in many cases, their parents are there too. And these aren't grandparents necessarily like my grandparents, who were probably my age when I was born. Some of these grandparents are in their late 30s or 40s because of these short generations of childbearing among some. So grandparents isn't just age, it's also, it's generational. And with short generations, you have this collapse. And so the complications in the workforce of a grandparent in her 40s has to leave work to take care of a sick kid, their grandkid. We have to develop a flexible business relationship, just acknowledgement that our workforce has a much more, and they may be caring for elderly parents at the same time that they're caring for grandkids. It's quite a shift. This is another view of, this is just in 2010. And you see the large numbers are, this is in the thousands living with both grandparents, and in many cases, again, with both parents, so you have multi-generation families. Part of this was the recession. Kicked a lot of families had to move in together, had to consolidate their resources. This may be changing as we move out of that some, but it's a big change. Here's just North Carolina, a large increase between 2005 and 2010, a 30% where the grandparents were responsible for grandchildren. Not just they lived with them, they were responsible for them. Again, a troubling complication in our society. And again, child's parents are also in the household. Another effect of the recession. Guys, it's over. I'm sorry. We had a good run, eh? My daughters graduated from UNC Asheville last year. In high school, the AP classes, it was almost all girls. I mean, that's just, and I don't know what's happened, but Hannah Rosen wrote an article and a couple of articles in Atlantic, and a book called The End of Men a couple of years ago, started a big debate about what's happening. And we all know there's been this increase in the workforce, women participation, still there's differences in wages for the level of wages for the same type of work. But they're breaking through, they're changing. And the recession again, it was a men's recession. It hit men's jobs in particular, hit them very hard. Jobs lost in the, right in the heart of the recession in these areas. Construction, 1.3 million men. Manufacturing, 1.9 million men lost jobs. Healthcare both gained, but women gained more. Government, a lot more gains for women. So total, 4.7 million job loss for men, 1.7 million job loss for women. The recession hit men really hard in what had been traditional male jobs in manufacturing and construction, as the recession just moved those, at least slowed down construction until the revival. And manufacturing is, the whole shape of, many of you know better than I do, the shape of manufacturing has changed. Today, 3 times as many men who are in working age do not work as all as compared to 1969. Their selective withdrawal, male withdrawal from the labor force. Rising non-employment due to skills mismatch, disability, and incarceration. We put a lot of people in jail for nonviolent crimes. Disability has, percentage of prime-age men on disabilities doubled since 1970. Accounting for inflation, the median income for men has declined by $13,000 since 1969. This is particularly worrisome, after peaking in 1977, the year after I graduated from here, the male college completion rate has barely changed. The class of 2010, at every level except professional, where they're essentially the same, more women receive degrees than men. UNC, 60% women, something like that, undergraduates. Enrollment, we see in North Carolina, full-time, 64% women. Two-year college is 43% women. Across the country, women are more likely to be seeking and attaining higher education than men. A UNC system, 44% male, this is 2010, this is the system. Majority serving, that's predominantly white, is 46%. That's because NC State's the only 50-50 campus left. At minority serving, the HBCUs plus Pembroke, 38% male. The HBCUs, 37% male. All of this has huge implications, this increasing complexity of the diversity, the changing family patterns, has great implications, we think, for the workforce planning, workforce development, how you run a business, how do we manage this transition as we gray, as we get older. Part of us get older while we're also becoming browner, more diverse, ethnically diverse. We're in a competition for talent, and we can see in the state who's winning. Geographically, it's the thriving urban metro areas. But it's also a global competition. We did some work up in Rockingham County, a county that's been hit really hard by the recession. They've lost, in absolute numbers, they've lost the largest number of any county. Until recently, the head of economic development up there, he'd been a long-time county manager in Forsyth, said his job is to keep Rockingham County from being the low-cost alternative to China. It's not a pretty picture, and he's not really kidding. So we're in a global competition for talent and for work. And we have to recruit and retain successfully on how you can manage this in the future, these growing complexities of our population and our workforce. People move to opportunity, and they move away from limited opportunity. It's a reality. It's what we have, and it's always been that way. A third of the counties in the country have lost population since 2010. There's a wonderful website on rural America, rural policy called the Daily Yonder. They do numbers really well. And, these are people who love rural areas. I live on a small farm, and I got 45 acres up in northwest Orange County, and I love being out in the country, but I can't make a living being a farmer, but both of my parents, grew up on farms. It's a wonderful life, and rural life is part of North Carolina's heritage that we all celebrate, but it's becoming much more difficult to do so. These geographic and demographic disparities magnified when we think about the human capital. The rural areas, we have to figure out how to retain some of the kids we're educating, and then draw maybe people who return home from after going and starting a career somewhere. So bring back experience and talent and a Rolodex and hopefully a bank account. It's hard to attract new businesses when your talent is left. It's hard to convince a factory to move to many of our communities that are being challenged when they can look and see that much of the talent's gone. It's not just finding a factory to go in there. You're not going to get a factory when they can see that their workforce isn't there. There's huge implications for education. I'm going to spend just a little time on that. I'm almost through. I know you got a lot of things to do today. I'm going to talk about what Jim Johnson is really pushing, this triple whammy effect. It's geographic and demographic disparities. I went backwards there. Let me show you what this is. He has this typology of this triple whammy of educational inequality. The counties in red are what he calls racial generation gap counties, where the majority of the school-age population is non-white, but the majority of the voting-age population is white. It's really hard to get in those counties to get support for public education. It's very hard to get support for public education. People feel like they don't have a stake in it, but they do, enormously if you value your community. The others are the yellow are majority counties. Majority are non-white. Most of these counties have no tax base. The Leandro counties, if you know the Leandro case in North Carolina, most of those are either majority minority or majority counties. They don't have enough of a tax base to provide the constitutionally mandated minimum public education. And this is what these counties look like. The majority, most of the kids are white, there's some diversity. Majority minority, you got 17% white. The racial generation gap, 35% white. And then the next whammy is we still have just really high levels of racial residential segregation. This is mapped by census tract. And the orange are over 60% non-white, the red are over 60% white, and the yellow are mixed. And again, in the highly segregated, the predominantly non-white, the school, again, we have the shift in the population, only 11% are white. The other part is high concentrations of poverty. And the dark red, it's more than 40% of the households are in poverty, 40%. The orange is 20 to 40, it says 25, it's 39%. So, and then the yellow are less than 20%. So again, there's racial composition that goes with the high poverty areas. In many places, all three exist. 9.8 million kids are in triple whammy, 93% of them non-white. Double whammy, 12.2 million kids, 81% non-white. Single whammy, 20 million, 39%. No whammy, 32% million, 24% non-white. So because of our patterns of economic and segregation and racial segregation, we're putting much of our next generation at risk by not providing them with the resources to attain the education they need to compete in the 21st century economy, which is what we're talking about. We have to develop our human capital so that we can compete in this global economy. It's imperative if we're going to think about it. Some ideas for education. We have to be more actively engaged in K-12 in our communities, all of us. We have to improve male educational outcomes, especially black male educational outcomes. Again, we can't afford for men to slide further behind. We have to, if you want to get your Social Security paid, I hope you'll be pro-immigrant for many reasons. It's a pay-as-you-go, and you saw the median ages. So it's immigration, again, is a complex and emotional issue among a lot of people, but economically speaking, we need because demographically we need it. We have to grow. Business has to work more and more hand in glove with education to make sure they're graduating with the skills they need to compete in this ever-changing global economy. You go into advanced manufacturing today, you can't go out of high school. You have to know calculus. It's a different world. You can't walk out of the high school into a good job anymore. It's just a different world. And we have to augment our efforts to recruit plants, our traditional economic development strategy, the buffalo hunt, with a recruitment strategy to draw, say, our North Carolina born and bred back home so we can take advantage of what they've learned elsewhere and revive our areas that are being challenged. I could go on all afternoon, but you've got a lot more interesting things to hear about. I thought I'd take some questions. Yes, sir.
What is Texas and
Florida.
Florida doing to pull in so much industry? Because with industry, that means jobs, and with jobs, that means revenue, and with revenue, that means education,
Right.
and all these other good things. So it starts with jobs. So what are they doing that other states are not doing? And what does North Carolina need to do to bring more industry to North Carolina?
Okay, you're quickly leaving my demographic expertise behind, but in particular in Texas, they've had the advantage of natural resources, and they've been able to build the oil and chemical business, especially in the Houston area. But also Dallas has grown enormously. But Texas's growth is as uneven as ours. Almost half of their counties have lost population as well. I don't know about their industrial policies, what they've done. I don't know if it's tax policy or if they are providing more incentives. I know Georgia and South Carolina are certainly providing more incentives for relocating industries in Alabama than North Carolina. So there's a complex of issues. There's a huge debate about incentives that many of you may be participating in. But we have to figure out some way, not just to attract business, but to spread our businesses out. Because again, the Raleighs and the Charlottes are doing fine. Charlotte, some of you know, some of you might not know, is a big center of German industry. And Siemens and others are there. And what they're doing, which is really interesting, is they're bringing the German apprenticeship model of training to Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, where they identify kids in high school, pay for them to go to Central Piedmont Community College while they're working and learning their skills, then promising them a job. So it's kind of a reforming what education is. So I don't know if they're doing that in Texas and Florida, but it's being done in parts of our state. But we're in competition with Texas and Florida and Georgia and South Carolina. Yes, sir.
The tax structure, disposable income has a lot to do with what people can buy. And so we got food, clothing, shelter, and taxes. And then after that, that's what we can, is the engine that drives our economy. So the higher our taxes, the more depressed our industry and the more depressed our buying ability becomes. And so we need to take a look at taxes, so lower tax rates bring in greater revenue, and that makes everybody happy.
You want to ask one more?
Again, I'm a demographer, but I take your point. Other questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
Your earlier slides tended to indicate today a change in family structures. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Would you correlate that change in family structures with change in educational outcomes and success rates? And taking a step beyond that, where does that lead you to say our efforts should be devoted?
Yes and no. I think in the short run, it can challenge, a single mother has a harder time going to college. We're doing a project at community colleges in North Carolina. On Tuesday, I was at Guilford Technical Community College, and we decided everybody focuses on kids that fail. We said, let's see who succeeds. Let's see who gets through. So I was talking to 15 African-American graduates. They were almost all in their 40s. Most of them had put their kids through college already, these people in their 40s. They said, when we were the age of most of these kids here, the streets looked too good for us. We had too good a time. And in some ways we messed up, but then we got it back together. And these are complicated families, there was a grandmother with her kid there. But in the short run, I think it does affect people's economics. But in the longer run, that was an hour I was really glad to have, to see these people who face some struggles, have complicated families. Many of them have already put their kids through. Now they're returning to grow themselves. So I don't think there's a simple answer. I mean, it is something everybody worries about, but people are pretty malleable and flexible, and people know you know, we all make mistakes, but a lot of people recover. There was a young kid who she said that the thing that got her through was she joined the single mother support group. She's 24, 25. And she's finishing, and she's going out in the labor force. She's going to be a nurse. And so it certainly adds complication, and we don't know what it's doing to some of these kids, you know, in terms of lack of a father in the house. I don't have to answer exactly what it's doing, but it's not all gloom. It's just, you know, people are finding their way, some successfully, others less so, but I think more successful than not. Not a way that we view traditionally as the route, you know, like me, you know, my father's a CPA. That's why I can make jokes about CPAs, you know.
Alan, there's one more over here.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't want to interrupt.
I realize what you're presenting, you know, are what the figures are, but with the change of Asian increasing, Hispanic increasing, especially in the Asian case, you're bringing a different culture here also. Eastern culture is different than Western, where I believe in Eastern culture, a lot of families do live together. When you're talking about all the grandparents
And
in the
Latinos as
homes.
well. Latinos,
Right.
yeah.
And so it's not analyzing why, I think would be just as important as
And
just using the figures.
it's not just an Eastern culture. Again, in North Carolina, we have complicated Asian cultures. Out in Burke County and Caldwell County, we have a lot of Hmong, a large number of Hmong. Then we have, you know, the Japanese, Chinese in our metro areas. And we have, and also in Burke, I know a lot about Burke County for some reason, we have a large Latino population working in a chicken plant who doesn't speak Spanish, you know. They speak their indigenous languages. So again, and in Orange County, we have indigenous speaking families. They're native from isolated parts of Mexico. It's getting really complicated out there. It's fascinating. Anybody else? I can predict demographically. I never predict economically.
Alan, you've given us a lot of figures and statistics to think about. Can you identify what sectors of the economy in North Carolina are reacting best to these changes and appear to have the flexibility and foresight to cope with them best as we go forward?
Yeah, certainly in the triangle, the IT communities and the triad, drawing talent from wherever they can find it around the world. And same with biotech, drawing talent wherever they can from around the world. Much of it coming through UNC or going through Duke or NC State. So in an education-driven economy, it's the sectors of the economy that rely on the highly educated, the highly skilled, and they're much more flexible. You know, most of you know SAS, started by a statistics professor at NC State. Year in, year out, named one of the 10 best places to work in the country. Incredibly flexible. They pick up your dry cleaning. They have daycare on site. Incredibly highly valued company over in Cary. They're a prime example of somebody who's realized the need for this high value added. It's got to be probably high value added like SAS, but they're doing an incredible job. Red Hat's doing the same thing over in Raleigh. So those seem to be the areas of the economy where they are adjusting to the changing world. Listen, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Welcome back to Chapel Hill.